Okay, learning target 2 for our unit on data and statistics is to interpret the correlation coefficient of a linear fit. I don't want you to take notes on this just yet because I want to show you something first, okay? So there's this thing called the correlation coefficient. And so we've talked about association when it comes to scatter plots. When they go up, they're positively associated. When they go up and down together, they're positively associated. When one goes up and the other goes down, they're negatively associated, okay? And we kind of estimated, we said, okay, there's a strong correlation or a weak correlation. And we just estimated that, if you remember in our first video. There's actually a thing called a correlation coefficient, and that's a number that tells us how strongly or how weak that correlation is between those two variables. So we're going to look at some of these, and these numbers range from 1 down to 0 to -1. And when the correlation coefficient is at 1, it's very strongly related. When it's at -1, it's very strongly related. The only difference is when it's at +1, there's a positive association, and when there's at -1, it's a negative association. So that makes sense. So if we look at this, if I update graph 1 here, this would be a very loosely associated, so a very weak positive association and a very weak negative association. So you can see there's almost no correlation. I would probably said this isn't related. You can see a 0 association is almost looks the same, but scientifically this has no association. So 0 means no association. -1 is a little bit. And you can look here as I go through these negative associations, and as I get closer to 1, my data points are all getting closer and closer together. And then when I got to -1, they form a line, okay? And so I can do the same here with my positive association. I can see that I start to get a little tighter. My data is clumped more and more together. And then when I get to 1, I have a line, okay? And so let's go back and to your note sheet and talk about this. I have a lot of notes here. You only have to take notes on the top 2 red pieces there. Why don't you jot down under correlation coefficient. But I'm going to talk through everything. So either pause the video now and take down your notes, or wait till I'm done. So a number that is a measure of the strength and direction of the correlation between two variables is the definition we're going to use for correlation coefficient. They will range from 1 to -1. And we call that number R, okay? They just use the variable R for that correlation coefficient, okay? And that's just, I don't know the reasoning behind that. It's just what the mathematicians said it should be, okay? Don't take these notes down, but the closer R is to 1 or -1, the less scattered or the stronger the relationship is. Only data points with scatter plots which are perfectly straight have R equals -1, which when it's negatively associated, and R is +1 when it's positively associated. So when R is less than 0, the data has a negative association, and when it's greater than 0, the data has a positive association. Okay? So let's move on then to estimating some of our own. You guys have 7 graphs here. Why don't we do 2 things? Why don't you take a moment and estimate your own R's, and then we're going to also take a moment and we'll go through these together and you can see what I might estimate them to be. Okay, so take a second and do that, and then we'll go through and see what I think in all of these. So here, this would be, I think we called this a weak association. So maybe I would say, but it's positive, so I would say a positive 0.4 maybe, something like that. Here I would call this maybe a positive 0.7 or 0.8. This would be R is a positive 1 because it makes a straight line. I would say this is R is 0. Then if this is the negative version of that, maybe this is a negative 0.4 or maybe a negative 0.3, because I think this one kind of is out of whack there. This would be maybe a negative 0.7 or 0.8, and then this would be a negative 1 because it makes that straight line. So summarizing what we have here, an R value that is close to either -1 or 1 means that the relationship between the variables is strong, or the data is very strong or close together. The positive R value, so when R is greater than 0, means the data is positively associated. Negative, so when R is less than 0, the data is negative associated. And the R value that is close to 0 means the relationship between the variables is very weak. And if it is 0, that means there's no correlation. So what I want you to do is I want you to find a scatter plot, either online or in a newspaper or in a magazine, or print it off and bring it in. Okay? I would prefer you email it to me, so maybe find a picture or screenshot a picture and email it to me at Megan Hansen at prairiepride.org. And we're going to talk about all of these together. We're going to do kind of a roundabout with your scatter plots, talking about their correlation coefficient, their association, and how the variables relate. All right, bring those in for class.